and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole Anderson, as always, and today we're talking about a very special piece in the opus of Frédéric Chopin, the Nocturne in C-sharp minor. This piece was only published long after Chopin's death in 1875, and we only have one extant source of this in Chopin's hand, which is a version of the piece that he wrote in 1830, probably earlier on in 1830 when he was in Vienna before the November Uprising. And he sent it to his sister Ludwika with the little note attached that it was intended as an exercise for her before beginning the study of his second concerto. And this could only have been meant humorously because anyone who knows the second concerto and knows this nocturne knows that they're nowhere near comparable in difficulty. The second concerto is a fully fledged, long, difficult virtuoso work. This nocturne is a very good introduction to playing Chopin, as it is only moderately difficult, although very subtle to make it sound beautiful and expressive. Now, in addition to this autograph that we have remaining from Chopin in 1830, there are also copies of what appear to be another autograph from later on, which is now lost. But there are copies by others, including Chopin's sister, which suggest that Chopin made some revisions to the Nocturne. And the version that you usually hear nowadays in recorded performances and then on the concert stage is this second version. So I am going to be going through some of the differences between these two versions in this video. I chose to retain some details from the earlier version, which I think are quite striking and quite experimental, and which Chopin seems to have smoothed out later, perhaps to make it easier to play for students or general piano enthusiasts, I don't know. Another thing which is kind of remarkable about this piece is that it was definitely Chopin in a jocular mood. Although the outer sections are extremely beautiful and expressive, the middle section has some kind of cheeky little nods to other works that Chopin had composed, most notably, of course, the second piano concerto, but also his song, The Maiden's Wish, which is a very well-known song from his set of Polish songs, and also exists in a fairly famous transcription by Franz Liszt, which isn't played so much nowadays, but back in the day it was recorded by all the great artists, Hoffman, Sergei Rachmaninoff, and many others. So there are also these kind of little cheeky quotations, and the character changes very much in the middle section and takes on the character of a vigorous mazurka at one point as well. So the piece begins with a rapt introduction, and there's only one small difference between the two versions here. In the later version, Chopin puts this first low note in the left hand down an octave, which I think is a very good alteration, and I use that myself. Good. So after this very beautiful opening, we get the main theme. And for the most part, the differences between the two versions here are fairly small. There is one detail which I don't know in what version this originates from, but you'll oftentimes hear this measure in measure 8 with a D sharp, and that sounds like it can only be a mistake to me. It really sounds just wrong to me if you hear it. So here's what it sounds like with the D sharp. Many people play that, but in the early version in the manuscript, it's an F sharp here, which I think is obviously correct. You'll also notice that in the revised version, Chopin added some little interior voices also. He kind of marked these interior voices, it would seem, in the tenor in bar 11. So this is another very typical kind of Chopin-esque writing, and I think that's perfectly appropriate. I use those as well. Now, it's in the middle section where things really get interesting, because in the original version of this middle section, Chopin uses mixed meters for the right and left hands. So the left hand continues in common time, but the right hand shifts to 3/4 here. And this looks like it would be very, very complicated to play, but actually it's not so difficult. Since one bar of 3/4, you get 6/8 notes against 4/8 notes in common time in the left hand. You're basically just playing 2 against 3, but it has a very interesting kind of dreamlike sound. Here's what it sounds like. This happens to be a quotation from his second piano concerto. This is the theme of the last movement, a very, very beautiful kind of reflective theme, which grows into something very vigorous and active as the movement goes along. Now, in the revised version, Chopin changed this to keep both hands in the same meter, and to accomplish this, he had to change the rhythm a bit. So he changes it, as you can see, into a quarter note followed by 4/16, and then he has a triplet. It sounds kind of like this. So it definitely works that way. There's nothing wrong with it. However, there's something just a little bit more angular and less interesting about this version. It also makes the quotation a little less precise. I kind of like the original version partly because it maintains the meter from the original, and we get the exact same rhythm from the original theme, just suddenly transposed over the left hand. So it's almost as if the pianist is improvising and at this moment suddenly thinks of this other theme from this concerto, which is in 3, and just keeps it in 3 as he's moving along with the left hand. When the theme goes back to 4/4 here, we get another quotation. This is from the first movement of the second concerto. So it sounds like this in the orchestra part, in the orchestral tutti in the first movement. There's one more quotation towards the end of this section. Chopin quotes a little snippet from The Maiden's Wish, which I already mentioned. So it's this bit right here. And in the original version, transcribed by Liszt, it sounds something like this. Another reason that I really, really like this passage in the original version is because it gives one of the best examples I know of what Chopin really meant by tempo rubato. Chopin claimed that one should basically always play in time. So tempo rubato for him was not an agogic thing. It didn't have to do with slowing down and speeding up so much. Now, probably he did use this kind of rubato, the slowing down and speeding up variety, but at least he said that he didn't use this sort of rubato. So that says at least something. When he talked about rubato, he talked about it the same way that Mozart did, that the left hand should be the conductor and stay absolutely steady, and that the right hand should kind of weave around the left hand's support. So sometimes delaying, sometimes playing a little later. In practical terms, this ends up with the hands not lining up on important beats. And that's really what you get here. You get this kind of feeling that the two hands are not in sync, especially towards the end of the passage when we get that quotation from the Maiden's Wish. I just think that whole passage is so much more evocative and imaginative in that version than in the more square later version. Even though it does require a little bit of thought just to make everything line up correctly, I think it's well worth it. Now, after the end of this part, we get a transition passage, which is very different in character. So this is another very humorous touch that Chopin includes here. We get something which is more like a mazurka, and this is again a quotation from the last movement of the second concerto. So it's this passage and the second concerto. And there's no question about it, it's definitely a mazurka. Now in the Nocturne, it's a little bit more reflective and thoughtful, but it's notated a bit like this. And this is another place where there's a slight difference between the two versions. In the early version, there is no accompanying melody for most of this passage. It's just the triplet rhythm, the kind of mazurka rhythm. Again, kind of as if Chopin was just remembering this rhythm kind of floating, and it just comes to him and he decides to improvise on it for a little bit. There's something very kind of charmingly improvised and of the moment about this. One could really imagine that Chopin must have improvised this. So there we have it. This is a wonderful, wonderful piece, very beautiful and evocative piece. Of course, made famous by the pianist Władysław Szpilman, the inspiration for the main character in Polanski's movie The Pianist, who played this on the last radio broadcast in Poland before it was conquered by the Nazis in World War II. So in a different way than something like the A-flat major Polonaise, it has been kind of a point of national pride and an inspiration to Poles. And I think it should be to everyone as well, because it's just another example of this exquisite genius that Chopin had and the enormous world that he could open on just the piano with no other help besides just two hands on the piano. So I think that about covered everything. So here comes my complete performance. This is my performance that kind of amalgamates the two versions. I use basically the middle section from the original version, and I use some of the other revisions in the rest of the piece. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next week for some more great music. Until then, take care, keep practicing.